Hiya folks, it's Kikoskia here and welcome back to Writing and Me. This video contains no gameplay or music whatsoever, allowing you to focus on whatever it is you're up to, whether it's editing, listening to music, working, or trying to sort out every single spoon in the universe in order of magicalness. I wish you luck in that endeavour, because it means you're going to have to face the Empire of Spoons. And the Empire of Spoons are no trivial matter to overcome. Each of those spoons in the Empire of Spoons are magical beyond our wildest comprehensions, and just thinking about opposing them puts you in danger of being noticed by their spoon seers. And once they've noticed you, they'll turn you into a fork. And trust me, it's very difficult to sort out all spoons in order of magicalness when you've been turned into a non-sentient fork. Still, I wish you luck. You're going to need it. As for the topic of today's video, I'm going to talk about something that's in pretty much every story, but you don't tend to think about when it occurs, and that is travelling. The movement from one place to another. What is travelling? Simply put, it's moving any distance, be it across the room to across the universe, going from point A to point B, or going from point A to point C with point B being in the middle. It's any amount of distance moved by anyone. That is travelling. We're all travelling right now, even if you don't realise it, because the Earth is orbiting around the Sun. We cannot feel that it's occurring, but it is happening. And everything is moving in the Milky Way. So even if the Earth wasn't moving, the Milky Way is. Which means the Earth is moving. Travel is complicated at times. Travel in a story can range from being entirely insignificant and just a means to an end to get people from one place to another so that the main plot can occur, to being the entire focus of a plot. So the first question that you need to ask yourself is, how important is travel in my story? There are some stories where travelling is what happens most of the time. The Lord of the Rings is a big example of this. It is one massive journey that takes place over a year. It starts off with one group, and then it slowly splinters off into other groups, but people are always travelling from one place to another. And if you get the map of where they go, they travel a long way, and along the way they encounter many things, many people, many places, all of which are described in quite a lot of detail. There's a lot of combat, there's a lot of intrigue, but travel is actually one of the things that is pretty constant throughout. And then there are stories where there's just a throwaway sentence of, Bob went to the shops, and then a scene happened at the shops, and then Bob left the shops and got on the bus and went to the train station, and then there's a scene at the train station. Both are absolutely fine. One story has travel as one of the main focuses, while the other story has travel as a means to an end. But when do you determine if it's worth describing said travel? There are various questions that you could ask that will help you come up with that answer. And the first one is a simple one. Are events happening during that journey that are worth mentioning? You'll know where the characters are going from and where they're going to, and you know what is on the journey. You need to think about if any of the things that they are going to encounter are worth mentioning to the reader, and they don't have to be things that are plot critical. You definitely want to mention things that are plot critical, but sometimes you want to mention things that aren't plot critical so that the world isn't full of only things that are important for the story. A world that is full of only super significant structures and places and people is a world that's going to be remarkably empty, because there are loads of things all over the place that aren't important to any one person's particular stories or objectives or quest, but are there anyway. They could be important to someone else. That person just doesn't happen to be in the group right now. And such things may be worth describing just on the merit of what they are. It could be a beautiful forest. It could be an ancient crumbling castle. It could be the shattered remnants of a starship that's slowly being pulled into a black hole. Any of those things could be described. The amount of detail that you're going to describe them in depends on a number of factors, though. The first of which being how long the characters are near this thing so that they can get a good look at it, and also which person is actually looking at the thing. different characters will pay different things different amounts of attention. A designer of spaceships will find the wrecked Space Hulk far more interesting than they'd find a forest, unless they also really like forests, whereas a different character will spend hours looking in the forest if given the opportunity, and won't even bat an eye at the ruined remnant of metal being pulled into a black hole. That is not as interesting to them as the wonders of nature. Some characters, when they pass through a room, won't even pay any attention to it beyond looking at the door for the next room, whereas some will glance about and see that there is a person sat there in the corner, there's a picture on the wall. The picture doesn't need a lot of description unless you feel like it needs a lot of description. And this fact leads on to my next point, and that is, will this description interrupt the flow of the story? I've been mentioning the flow of the story quite a bit, and you need to be very careful not to have your narrative bogged down by huge amounts of description that slow everything to a crawl. If your characters are quickly trying to get from point A to point B, and there's a lot of tension, a lot of drama, and something big is about to occur, there is no better way to completely kill that suspense than have 3 pages dedicated to describing each and everything in intense detail. There'll be lots of things about, and the reader does not at this point want to hear about how wonderfully designed that set of pipes are. The pipes are likely not important. What is important at that point is describing how urgent things are, and about how concerned the characters are, and about how each of their footsteps as they rush along these walkways and staircases clatter against the metal, each one full of desperation and silent hope that they won't be too late. That is more important at that point. The details of travel need to take a back step, but you are still describing the travel. You're just not describing things, you're describing the way they're travelling and the feelings that they're feeling while they're travelling. You are still describing the event. You're just not looking around while you're doing it. You're looking in instead of out. And deciding whether you want to be focusing on the thoughts of the characters and feelings of the characters rather than the things around them is an important thing you need to think about every time you decide to describe travelling. At the mention of those characters potentially being too late to save the world, one thing you always need to remember when you're describing travelling is that time passes when they do so. These characters do not exist in a vacuum, at least most of the time. There are ways that people can travel without time passing, usually teleportation or some other kind of magic. But even that takes fractions of seconds, and all other methods of transportation take quite a lot longer. And you need to remember that your characters do not exist in this bubble of, well, we can move wherever we like and no time will pass. If it takes an hour to go through this facility to get to the button that they need to prevent the villain from pressing, that's how long it will take. And you need to convey that that time passes. Whether it's them noticing a clock every now and again and seeing the time passing, whether it's a character counting every second because they're so worried that they won't get there in time, whether it's you simply saying they spent an hour rushing through the facility, desperately hoping that they were not too late. That sentence right there is all you need to convey that an hour has passed. But when it's a lot longer than an hour, and the distance is a lot further, you have opportunities to do more than just describe the odd random thing. If the journey is such that characters have relative freedom to go about and do other things, like say on a spaceship, or a boat, or a plane, there's the opportunity for whole scenes to occur while on a journey. And this is an opportunity that you should not dismiss idly. Characters will be doing all kinds of things while on one of these journeys. You have the opportunity for character development, for them to go and engage in their hobbies, or try something new, or go to a restaurant, or go watch a movie, or any number of things. You do of course need to keep in mind that time, of course, is still passing. You can't have them go and write an epic saga that is 5,000 pages long if the journey is only 3 hours, unless they are really, really good at writing, or some sort of magical writing savant who can write 100 pages every second. And you also need to keep track of how many of these events you are doing. Again, you need to watch out for the pacing and flow of your story, and make sure that everything isn't bogged down by loads and loads of small events occurring in a single journey. Of course, if the journey is a massive, long endeavour, you will have a lot of events. And one thing that I find a lot of people underestimate is that one particular method of transportation tends to take quite a long time, even in settings where faster than light travel exists, and that is space. To quote one of my favourite authors, Douglas Adams, about space, "Space is big. You just won't believe how vastly, hugely, mind-bogglingly big it is. I mean, you may think it's a long way down to the road to the chemist's, but that's just peanuts to space. Space is colossal. And even with fictional drives that can go faster than light, you are still talking about weeks and even months to get from one place to another. Cryogenic freezing can do a lot to make it so that the characters don't realise time is passing, but time is still passing. And while the characters that are frozen may not perceive it, there may be a pilot who's still awake, some engineers that are ensuring that everything is still functioning properly. Those characters can have events happening. Of course, if they're not the main characters and they're just background people, there probably won't be more than the odd scene and a few lines. But there is still things happening. Of course, if there isn't cryogenic freezing, then these ships will have all of the things that you need for long-term survival. There will be food, there will be entertainment, there will be rooms, there will be all the things that you'd expect to see on an extremely luxurious cruise ship, and probably a lot more. All of that makes the spaceship not just a method of transportation between the stars, but also a floating settlement. And when you think of it like that, suddenly a lot of things can happen there just while you're travelling from point A to point B. So many things, some of which you'll want to write about, some of which you won't. It all depends on what you think is important. If there's a lot of travel in your story, one thing I would definitely recommend is making a timeline of said journey so that you can keep track exactly how much time is passing and what occurs when. With journeys that take place over many months, you really want to keep a handle on what point in the journey when any events that occur during the journey happen, so that you can not only make sure that you're keeping tabs of everything else that's happening beyond the journey, but also so that you don't have too many events happening in too short a period of time. You have the start, you have the end, you have a line, and you can split it up into even segments of time and little lines outward going, and this character talked here to this person, this character had a little sparring match with this person, they all went out for a restaurant meal, the villain decided to infiltrate the ship here and try and destroy the faster than light system, the villain is discovered and then foiled here, and then they all went bowling. Including the villain, because the villain wasn't really evil after all, the villain was just trying to stop them from encountering an even bigger bad that was waiting in ambush. And then they had more bowling, and then the story deviates off wildly into a bowling adventure, full of bowling fun. And then the greatest villain of them all appeared who wanted to ban bowling, and the heroes couldn't have that, and so they team up and seek out the bowling ball of legend, and you get the idea. Lots of bowling, lots of events, all of them carefully catalogued. In general, it's a really good idea to keep track of time in your stories as you go about writing them. Having that timeline of events, not just for journeys, but in general, is something I would definitely recommend you do. It just makes keeping track of everything a lot simpler. And so, with that, that is my general advice on travelling in stories. What travelling is, why people decide to do it, and if it's worth describing it. Always consider who the person that is looking at the stuff is, what they're interested in, if there are things there that are worth describing for that person or in general, if there are things that are plot significant that need describing, and how much time is passing, so that you don't have too many events occurring that bog down the flow of the story. Of course, if you have a method of describing things that works for you, by all means stick to it. Some people prefer to have very little detail in the background that's not plot important, and that's fine. Some people prefer to have loads, and that's also fine. Whatever works for you is something you should stick with. What I say here is just general advice to help people come up with what works best for them, and if it helps, then I'm happy. And so, folks, when we come back, we'll focus on something else concerning writing. What that will be remains to be seen. I've not made the journey through my mind yet to that topic, but I will, and while it will be a bumpy road, I'm sure I'll reach my destination in the end. And so, I'll catch you next time, folks, and I'll see you then. Later.